Two scientists walk into a church. The first scientist looks around and immediately starts analysing the geometric proportions of the building, assessing its structural integrity and choice of materials in awe of the church's mathematical and architectural splendour. The next scientist starts examining the objects in the church, the crucifix, the candles, the altar, the statues of the angels and saints, and then she says to herself out loud, "Look, it seems to me like these objects mean something. I may need my test tube to figure it all out, but my initial observation suggests that these items have some deeper meaning that I don't think any of my proven theories will be able to authenticate." Then the two scientists turn towards each other. "So apparently this is a place where people get married," said one scientist. "Yes, when two people love each other, they want to make that commitment before God and before a congregation," the other said. They turned towards each other and say, "Well, what about us?" they asked. "Are we in love?" "I think so," said one scientist, "for I have examined the evidence. I have examined our levels of dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, and oxytocin, and my analysis indisputably confirms that we are indeed in love." "Yes," said the other scientist, "yes, I have also looked at the evidence. I'm quite satisfied with what happens to our brains when we spend time together, and what happens in the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. And yes, it seems to be that we are in love. Our relationship will be a guaranteed success. I have complete faith in the science." I'll stop that story there. You may be wondering where on earth I am going with this. This was the beginning of a homily I preached on Friday for some friends for their wedding, and both the bride and groom are scientists. Now, to be clear, they're not like what I just described. It was a fun caricature and a playful way to transition from exploring a scientific conception of love into expanding it into the Christian exploration and conception of love and marriage. And I thought I'll just keep that as a useful segue into what I was also pondering about for this weekend's homily on today's gospel. So we're on the topic of love, the greatest commandments. The word love, you say today, arguably the most used and misused words in the English language, one that is really embarrassingly imprecise. It's a very slippery word has such a vast semantic range where we can say all sorts of things like, I love pizza, I love the weather today, I love the Brisbane Broncos. Yes, I'm still recovering from a few weeks ago. Yes, I love my mother, I love my Catholic faith, I love God. But each time we say the word love, it means something different in different contexts. I don't love my mother in the same way that I love pizza, and if I did, I would be in big trouble. But really, you could say love is tossed around so loosely today, it seems like anything and everything seems to be love. After all, the catch cry today is love, a very circular definition that is deceptively ambiguous. It does not want to be defined because love is what I want love to be. So I began with that caricature because partly to address one of the cultural framings of love today, which is the turning of love into a science. So what are we to say about the prevalence of all the scientific explanations of love today, the psychology of love, the biology and neuroscience of love, whereby one's understanding of love is subsumed into the domain of chemical processes and neurological activity? Now, to be clear, I actually really enjoy a lot of that stuff and find fascinating all the insights provided by the sciences with regard to love and relationships, and there's much to learn and gain from by their insights. One of the things I'm reading at the moment, the past few months, my bedtime reading has been reading on the fundamental differences between the male and female brain and how that impacts life, work, and relationships. So you say that the problem is not necessarily in the insights as such, but with its worldview, its reductive tendency, that is to say that love has gone through a kind of deconstruction and reductionism where it is stripped away of its mystery, its transcendence, and its spirituality into a phenomenon that is purely mechanical and materialistic, into something that can be verified in data. And so the most important thing in the world, the whole meaning of life, namely love, true love, what God means by love, what Christ means by love, and what his two greatest commandments mean by love in the gospel today, can now all be explained in verifiable data, so it seems. So then we must ask, what about God? And what are we to say about God's love and that God is love? How do you test that, and how do you verify that his very being is love? As we profess that even before humanity, before creation, and before anything was to be scientifically verified, love already existed. As the great medieval poet Dante, one of my favorite quotes from him, he said, "Love is the thing that moves the sun and the stars." That is to say, love is the creative force. It's the reason why we exist in the first place. For if we exist, it is because of love, and it is through that very love we are continued to be held in existence. Indeed, the sciences can aid us in how to love better and show us what happens to our bodies when love is in the air, so to speak. But does that capture the full reality of love? As our faith reveals, love precedes creation, love precedes our biological and chemical makeup, and therefore the experience of love is that love is the greatest thing that reminds us that there is more to reality than what can be grasped by the material world. And you and I know and can resonate with this through our own experiences. For when you really love someone, when you love your neighbor, you're not loving their biological and psychological makeup. You aren't loving their material attributes, lest you reduce that person into an object. For when you truly love someone, you are reverencing something much more mysterious in the person, something much more profound and beautiful, something ultimately transcendent and divine. For it ought to point us from the person who is to be loved to God who is love itself. For we ourselves are in the image and likeness of God who is love, and therefore we are in the image and likeness of love itself. In the first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 16, it says that we love because God first loved us. Pope Benedict XVI says it in this way: since God has first loved us, love is not a mere command. It is primarily a response to the gift of love already given to us, with which God draws near to us. So to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, therefore, is to love the very source of love itself. It is to love love itself. And we give our all because all has been given to us. And so today, if we want to grow in love, we've got to turn to the very source of love itself, Jesus Christ, who gave his all to us in love on the cross and poured forth as a gift today in each and every Eucharist. This is the Christian faith and the divine science of love. Let us pray.